I'd like to welcome everyone this afternoon in Buckingham to this Women's Parliament. We've had the Women's Parliament on the 8th of March 2022, on the 8th of December 2022, celebrating in the first instance International Women's Day, and in the second affirming International Human Rights Day and the 16 days of action against violence against women. In 2023, we held the Parliament on the 8th of March, International Women's Day again. And on each occasion, we've held the Women's Parliament in the Council Chamber, in Cambridge City, in the Guildhall. This time, we're coming from the Moot Court at the Law School at the University of Buckingham. So welcome to everyone. The motion that we are debating today is as follows. The Women's Parliament held in Buckingham, England on Wednesday, the 6th of March, during the United Nations International Women's Day Month of Action. 1. Notes that the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, was signed by the United Kingdom in 1981, was ratified by the United Kingdom in 1986, the optional protocol was agreed to by the United Kingdom in 2004, and ratification committed the government to advance, protect, promote and fulfil the human rights of women under all circumstances, including each and every provision of CEDAW, thereby giving an undertaking to incorporate the principles and provisions of CEDAW fully and effectively into domestic law. This Women's Parliament, too, observes that despite this commitment and this undertaking, legislative recognition by domestication of CEDAW is not yet realised, and there remains no full and effective legislative provision nor substantive equality in practice between women and men in the United Kingdom today, in the absence of which women remain vulnerable to a lack of rights or effective action in implementation of rights consistent with CEDAW. 3. This Parliament refers to the motion of the Women's Parliament passed unanimously on International Women's Day, the 8th of March 2022, endorsing CEDAW's provisions, in particular, but not only, by reference to the Abortion Act of 1967, an antiquated piece of legislation, the Equal Pay Act of 1970, the Sexual Offences Act of 2003, the Equality Act 2010, the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021, and demanding government and parliamentary action in introducing and passing a Women's Bill of Rights incorporating all CEDAW provisions and the general recommendations of the CEDAW Committee sitting in Geneva. 4. This Parliament refers to the motion of the Women's Parliament passed unanimously on the 8th of December 2022 during the 16 days of action against and to end violence against women, and seeking government action to comply with the signing and ratification of CEDAW by introducing a Women's Bill of Rights and taking effective action to address, combat and end violence against women in all its forms. 5. This Parliament refers to the motion of the Women's Parliament passed unanimously on the 8th of March 2023 on International Women's Day, seeking government and parliamentary action to ensure women's economic independence and to close the wages gap and the pensions gap, and to introduce and pass a Women's Bill of Rights consistent with CEDAW and the CEDAW Committee General Recommendations. 6. This Parliament recognises that the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that is CEDAW, outlaws both direct, that is unequal treatment, and indirect, which is quote unquote equal treatment, so-called discrimination between women and men in all aspects of life, including in education and training, employment, facilities, goods and services, accommodation, membership and activities of clubs, administration of laws and programs, and the media, and unless and until the provisions of CEDAW are fully and effectively implemented by introducing a Women's Bill of Rights, discrimination against women in the United Kingdom in all its forms will continue without a real effective chance of being ended. 7, this Parliament, recognising that discrimination against women is too often constituted by 1, vilification of misogyny, rape and other sexual offences, criminal assault at home and other forms of domestic violence, marital murder and dishonour crimes, and the killing of women of a spouse or partner, or by a spouse or partner, or former spouse or partner. 2, online violence, exploitation, victimisation and abuse, stalking and all social media abuses, including vilification and misogyny. And 3, sexual harassment, sexist harassment and bullying. This Parliament thereby demands recognition of women and girls' rights to just and effective laws in principle and operating in practice to end these human rights abuses. 8, this Parliament further demands that funding and resources of women's services in all areas of women's lives, including services for Black and minoritised women, trafficked and prostituted women, asylum-seeking and refugee women, women with a disability and all disadvantaged groups of women, be set at levels proper and appropriate for care, support, protection and advancement to independence of women, measured by reference to continuing inequality between women and men, and aiming to end this inequality through, amongst other measures, funding and resources enabling their implementation of policies, practices and actions to end this inequality. Furthermore, this Parliament, number 9, demands that all governments, national, devolved and local, and the private sector recognise concretely and effectively their responsibility and role in ending the wages gap and the pensions gap by ensuring implementation of equal opportunity in education and employment, in wages and pensions provision, and generally in ending employment, administration and business practices which elevate male-dominant perspectives and conduct, seen most readily in sexual and sexist harassment, discriminatory appointments and promotions, organisation of the workplace into male and female jobs, lack of recognition of the value of traditional women's jobs as equal to that of traditional men's jobs, and failure to address the pay gap and the pensions gap to ensure equal pay and equal pension or superannuation rights for women. If I can interpolate there for one moment, a heading came out in the newspaper recently saying it would take 19 years for the pensions gap to be done away with. Well, if a woman's 60 or 62 or 65, she can't wait 19 years. And if she's 50 or 55, she shouldn't have to wait 19 years. And what is interesting is that we constantly get this iteration of, as it says, so many years to close the pensions gap, so many years to close the wages gap. None of us is prepared to wait. We want action now. And therefore, this Parliament, number 10, calls upon all governments, national, devolved and local, to take a leading role in ensuring that a Women's Bill of Rights is introduced and passed by the Parliament, with consistent women's rights bills passed by the devolved authorities of Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and local government authorities around the United Kingdom to ensure that their policies and practices are consistent with the provision of CEDAW and the general recommendations. So this Parliament is here to debate that motion on CEDAW, women's rights, government responsibility, parliamentary action, a women's Bill of Rights. And the members of the Women's Parliament who are here today to speak in this debate are Luela Figueira. Luela Figueira obtained a Bachelor of Laws in 2021 from the University of Buckingham with first-class honours. She recently completed a Master's in Commercial and International Law with distinction and is currently exploring opportunities to develop her legal skills and knowledge as she pursues a career in the legal field. Being a youth ambassador for many years, Luela Figueira has first-hand experience working and aiding in the empowerment of young adults and girls. In this regard, she has a strong interest in human rights issues, particularly regarding women, girls, and the disadvantaged. We have also with us today, as a member of this Women's Parliament, Mollie-Anne Heywood. Mollie-Anne Heywood has worked as a children's social worker for several years. Over the past 4 years, she has combined full-time social work with studying a law MA and the bar course. She is co-president of the Inner Temple Debating Society and was called to the bar in October 2023, and Mollie-Anne Heywood looks forward to a career changing to a career at the family bar. Afeefa Salehmohamed is a recent bar vocational studies graduate from the City University of London and a feminist. Beginning pupillage in Mauritius in the coming months, she aims to specialise in intellectual property, competition and tech law. She holds a first-class honours Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Buckingham and is a passionate feminist who always includes a feminist perspective in her articles and essays, marked by personal and professional experience as an Asian woman of African nationality. She is determined to make a change in the legal world for women. Sue Crampton. Sue Crampton is a retired teacher and she has taught EFL, English as a first language, as a foreign language, I beg your pardon, and history in Middle Eastern countries and in British secondary schools. Whilst living in Catalonia and helping to run a walking holiday business, Sue Crampton began to write and to read more about women who had helped to combat fascism in the Spanish Civil War and who had been forgotten. She began to realise just how invisible many women were and are in history, and that sexism and misogyny are always pulling the strings. Sue Crampton discovered that women's lives were barely recognised and invariably undervalued. This seemed so unjust and unfair. She was determined to do something and wrote a fictionalised diary about a woman member of Parliament from her local town, using this technique so that her voice was more direct and not filtered through a narrator. Sue Crampton put this woman into Wikipedia too. She has published stories about some of the women in Catalan history and written a novel about sexism and exploitation in Iran in the 1970s, based on her experience when working there. Primarily, Sue Crampton has wanted to tell stories of forgotten, often courageous, and always inspirational women who have sadly been airbrushed from the past. Maryam Namazie. Maryam Namazie is an Iranian-born campaigner and writer and spokesperson of the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain and One Law for All. During decades of activism, Maryam has organised numerous actions, including hashtag Hair for Freedom and hashtag Body Riot, in support of the women of Iran. Executive produced Women Leaving Islam. The Islamic regime of Iran's media outlets had called Maryam Namazie immoral, a harlot, and corrupt. Words that celebrate Maryam Namazie's staunch fight for the rights of all women and the women of Iran in particular. Maryam has been featured in a 2016 film by Dia Khan called Islam's Non-Believers, and was also a character in DV8 Physical Theatre's Can We Talk About This? She is a winner of numerous awards, including the 2017 Henry A. Zumark Freedom for Religious Fundamentalism Award, the 2016 International Laicite Prize from the Comité Laicite République and National Secular Society Secularist of the Year Award, the year 2005. Gabrielle Ajobena. Gabrielle Ajobena is a first-class LLB graduate from the University of Buckingham. She completed her degree in 2023 and has since been working at Mercedes-Benz Finance, United Kingdom. She has always been dedicated to advocating for gender equality and women's empowerment, specifically ethnic minority women. This stems from her own experience as a Nigerian woman. She did a short stint at the Women in Business Management and Public Service, WIMBIZ, in Nigeria, when she interned and helped organise their annual conference in 2019. Her passion for women's growth and development was further strengthened during her time in Buckingham, where she was a member of the Feminist Society. There, she was able to interact with women from all around the world and engage in conversations about feminism, but importantly, intersectionality and the cards dealt to Black women across the world. She proactively seeks out spaces and ideas surrounding women's rights and developments, like a newly formed Birmingham-based book club, which meets bi-weekly and discusses Black feminist literature. Méabh Kirby. Méabh Kirby undertook a Bachelor of Laws at Trinity College Dublin before completing the BCL at the University of Oxford, where she studied medical law and took a particular interest in women's reproductive autonomy. Her previous experience includes working as a judicial extern at the Central District of California Federal Court, volunteering with a humanitarian organisation to assist refugees on the island of Lesbos, and as research assistant to her Oxford professor for a practitioner's textbook on child abuse. Méabh now works as a solicitor at Farrer & Co, where she sits on the Equality and Diversity Committee. Méabh Kirby uses her legal background through volunteering with Schools Consent Project, where she teaches classes on the law of sexual offences and consent to school students. Passionate she is about raising awareness on the importance of consent and building young people's confidence to speak out against sexually abusive behaviour. Kris Gibson, one of the 3.5 million remaining 1950s born women still fighting both direct discrimination, that is, unequal treatment discrimination, and maladministration that has blighted the lives of this cohort of women since the 1995 Pension Act introduced the change of women's gaining a state pension from 60 to 65 to equalise it with the men's age. From 1940, men had received the state pension at 65, women at 60. clearly based on assumptions about women's paid working lives and men's paid working lives, and they would be married to one another, a woman married to an older man, and therefore she would retire at 60 so that she could keep his slippers warm by the fire until waiting his retirement age. And this change of age was done in a way that singled out that cohort, the women born in the 1950s, so that they bore the full brunt of this transition. And this is the issue that Kris Gibson is fighting. With the women, she is involved in preparation and collection of evidence for the CEDAW People's Tribunal, which was held in 2021, and the CEDAW in Law People's Tribunal in 2022. The CEDAW People's Tribunal 2021 looked at the issues that directed and drove the call for a Women's Bill of Rights in this country to implement CEDAW, and the CEDAW in Law People's Tribunal of 2022 looked specifically at this issue of the pensions gap. And Kris Gibson is a member of the CEDAW in Law digital team. Debbie Allen. Debbie Allen is a multifaceted woman who not only organises events but also contributes to the creative arena with her poetry and greeting cards designed to celebrate diversity. Debbie Allen's initiatives go beyond traditional boundaries. For example, spearheading intergenerational and multicultural open mic evenings, establishing a toddler reading group, and negotiating trips to iconic spaces where people in her community would not ordinarily visit. Despite the loss of her eldest daughter and other life challenges, a huge life challenge when a child predeceases a parent. So despite that loss, tremendous loss, and other life challenges, Debbie's involvement in supporting borough-wide food banks and then instigating a local food bank and clothes swap shows her commitment to addressing issues of food insecurity and supporting vulnerable people. Through her diverse range of activities, Debbie Allen exemplifies a true community leader, fostering inclusivity, creativity, and social responsibility. Maneeka Bhujun. Maneeka has ambitions to become a barrister and eventually a judge. 24 years old, she is undertaking the final year of a Bachelor of Laws. She is also a Students' Union Network lead for race and inclusion. Maneeka Bhujun did some studying in accounting before seeing her way to come into the study of law, renouncing accounting. And she was the assistant project manager for a metro project in Mauritius. In her downtime, Maneeka enjoys Netflix shows, books and crocheting. I must actually, though, put in a word for accounting because it is a valuable skill to have in and of its own self, but particularly for a lawyer. If one were, for example, going into the family law area, one certainly needs to have accounting skills because of the property division and issues in relation to that particular aspect. And it would, of course, be relevant to commercial law and other areas of law. Yulia Gulyaeva. Yulia is a Russian-Canadian currently undertaking her Master of Laws in International Commercial Law. She is interested in environmental and criminal law and will be writing her dissertation on environmental crime. There's a real issue here about environmental crimes and whether they can and should be classed as crimes against humanity. When one considers the definite negativity of environmental crimes, whether committed by governments or private sector corporations, the impact is enormous, and therefore what Yulia is looking at is environment and criminal law and environmental crime. Yulia is an ex-film student and a professed cat person. She is currently the Women's Network lead at the University of Buckingham's Students' Union. Alison Huizeling. Alison is a first-year undergraduate law student and has a background in financial services, where she spent 38 years working in retail and investment banking and at a top 4 consultancy firm. She has been a non-executive director for 2 regulated firms. During her professional life, she contributed to a published paper on preventing and detecting human trafficking across Europe, as well as being a mentor for the 30% Club, the aim of which is to increase gender diversity at board level. Culturally astute, having lived and worked in the United Kingdom and the United States and spent much time in India, Alison is now focusing on protecting communities in rural England. She is aspiring to be a magistrate. Simone Michaud. Simone Michaud knows firsthand the injustices of dealing with the family justice system and the concerted efforts of the judicial system to silence women. She has litigated cases at every level of state courts in the United States, up to the Supreme Court in the state of Georgia as a pro se litigant, and finally won the battle in her own family law dispute. For the past 18 years, she has dedicated her life to advocating for gender equality and social justice in the context of family law, immigration, and domestic abuse, otherwise known as criminal assault at home and other forms of domestic violence. With a legal background and a passion for empowering marginalised communities, Simone Michaud strives to challenge system injustice and to promote inclusivity. She is excited to contribute to the Women's Parliament and to inspire positive change. Rosie Sparkes. Rosie Sparkes is a current LLB law and criminology student with a keen passion for promoting women's rights and protections. She also works for a family law firm, regularly dealing with women victims of domestic abuse, otherwise known as criminal assault at home and other forms of domestic violence, and has previously volunteered with Women's Aid at a local shelter. Rosie Sparkes is a keen activist and hopes to continue raising awareness, as she will certainly do, about the importance of equality and the eradication of violence against women. Dr. Cynthia Umezulike. Dr. Cynthia Umezulike is a human rights barrister and solicitor, a lecturer in law at the University of Buckingham, and a recognised human rights activist campaigning for a human rights-based approach to climate and environmental sustainability. She is the president of the Global Human Rights Centre in London, co-chair of the Honourable Justice Innocent Umezulike Foundation, and director of programs for the International Conference on Human Rights, Sustainability and Climate Change, the ICHRSCC. Dr. Umezulike provides expert human rights due diligence consultation and advisory technical support to governments, businesses, NGOs, non-government organisations, and international organisations, including the United Nations. She holds a bachelor's degree in law, 2 master's degrees, one from Queen Mary University of London and another from the University of East London. Dr. Umezulike also has a doctoral degree, a PhD from Birkbeck, University of London, and her current research interests are focused on the human rights approach to climate change and legal protection of a healthy, sustainable environment. Dr. Natalie Turney. Dr. Natalie Turney is a lecturer in law at the University of Buckingham. Her areas of research are predominantly corporate law and policy, and insurance law. This year, Dr. Turney is a delegate to the United Nations Women United Kingdom in CSW 68, that is, the Commission on the Status of Women Participating Online. Amongst other conference appearances, Dr. Natalie Turney recently spoke in Parliament in Westminster on the matter of directors' responsibility for corporate wrongdoing. Dr. Turney, Natalie Turney, attends the Women's Parliament to discuss the treatment in women within companies and the representation of women and girls in corporate policy. Sonali Bhujun. Sonali Bhujun is a law student with a background in accounting, forensic accounting. Sonali is a student union network lead for the LGBTQ+. She is dyslexic and autistic. Sonali is a politician in Mauritius. She ran for 2 elections and was the youngest person to take part in a by-election at the age of 21 years. Sonali Bhujun was the president of the youth wing of the Reform Party, and she is going to The Hague to represent the university for the Telders mooting competition. She loves fitness and working out in her free time. Lubna Sakhaar. Lubna Sakhaar is currently studying law and has future plans to continue her studies by undertaking a master's degree, an LLM. Lubna has always had a strong passion for advocating for all those in positions of struggle, women, ethnic minorities, and many more. She hopes one day to be in a position to help many of those who struggle and to motivate others to do so. Agnieszka Rutkowska. Dr. Agnieszka Rutkowska is a research leader with over a decade of expertise in biotechnology and electronics. Her innovative solutions significantly advance healthcare and personalised electronics. Agnieszka's career is marked by key leadership roles, including a CTO role at a Canberra-based startup, Myriaphone, where she leads the commercialisation of next-generation materials, and she is also science lead at Depixus
like to begin with the fact that despite studying and teaching history and reading extensively, I'd never heard of the Women's Parliament and its origins. And this, I think, makes my main point here today. Women are and have always been at the centre of things, but have and do remain invisible, often undervalued, sidelined, dismissed, and their efforts unrecorded. It is vital that this changes, and I maintain that for women now to be fully equal and treated as such, those from the past must be brought to life too. We shouldn't need a Women's History Month, as women are and have always been embedded in all history, having lived it and made it. It's up to us to make this more widely understood. At the moment, only 0.5% of recorded history is devoted to women, so that if recorded history approximately is 3,500 years old, women are only accounted for in 17 years of that. However, women have never been silent in history. They've spoken out forcefully and persuasively, despite the centuries-old taboo that they should avoid public life. Dana Rubin's speech, Speaking While Female, is now the first ever online library of public speeches by women. Up until 2005, there were very few records, if any, kept of public speeches by women. This is because the prevailing ideology that has governed the way we see and reconstruct the past until very recently has been that of Thomas Carlyle, who in 1844 said, "The history of the world is but the biography of great men, due to their superior intellect," etc., etc. Fortunately, there is now some recognition of this patriarchal and sexist view of the past, and strategies and campaigns have begun to change things. I have been a member of ESIS, the End Sexism in Schools campaign, which is seeking to end the gendered curriculum in secondary schools. And where their first survey of over of novels selected for 11 to 14-year-olds revealed that 80% were authored by men. There are now too considerably more historians and authors who are writing history from women's perspectives. This is an enormous field, but an opportunity to explore the past and open up all sorts of areas of the past. Writers like Helen Rappaport, Jane Robinson, Hayley Rubenhold, to name but a few, are all bringing women to life in exciting ways. I have found personally too that wherever I have lived and worked in UK and abroad, there were women whose courage and bravery had been frequently unrecorded. In Catalonia, there were many Spanish Republican women who did this. Also in the north, just across the border in France, a Swiss Red Cross nurse, for example, Elisabeth Eidenbenz, single-handedly set up a maternity hospital for Spanish and Catalan pregnant mums, as well as Jewish mothers fleeing from the Nazis. At the age of 90, she was finally honoured by the Swiss and Catalan governments. There was the Scottish Women's Hospitals who set up field hospitals in France and Serbia in World War I. The founder, Elsie Inglis, has again only recently been honoured by a plaque in Edinburgh. Extraordinarily, in Serbia, where the Scottish Women's Hospitals had hospitals, the women are nationally celebrated each year. I visited Dr. Elizabeth Ross's grave in Cragujebek and had no trouble finding someone who took me there, while back in northeast Scotland in Tain, she remains relatively unknown by the townsfolk, although she was born there. Right, so to sum up, I would like to urge you not to shy away from delving into the past, to discover what happened to women in your family, your town or elsewhere, and to think about ways they can be brought to life. It doesn't have to be through writing, as I've done, but can be with websites, social media, campaigns for women's statues, as in Wales, the monumental Welsh Women campaign, women's plaques, to name just a few ideas. Women who have been airbrushed out of our lives must be restored and valued once more in order for us to understand and for future generations to make sure that the world has not only been made, that everybody understands that the world has not only been made by men, but women too.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. And now I'd like to call on Kris Gibson to speak to the motion. Thank you, Kris.
Thank you. I'm speaking for myself as one of 3.8 million women born in the 1950s who were targeted to bear the brunt of the state pension age rises, which involved a rise of 6 years in state pension age over only 4.5 birth years. I was particularly struck that the theme for International Women's Day and the very first action point this year could have been written by a 50s woman. Inspire inclusion, forge women's economic empowerment. And last year's theme as well, of embrace equity. They exemplify everything that was not in place for 50s women. And that's why I'm here today. What we've experienced has been quite the opposite. We've not been consulted, we've been ignored, we've been stripped of any financial security that we'd managed to amass, very much against a level playing field. Most shockingly of all, perhaps, there was no impact assessment in 1995 when the first Act was put in place, and certainly not of the gender sensitive kind. And this was actually the case for the 2011 Act as well, which came after the Equal Opportunities Act. No gender sensitive impact assessment. Tended to focus more on the public purse than on the impact on the women. So 50s women, well, many left school at the age of 15. No level playing field in those days. We've had the Equal Pay Act, we've had the Sex Discrimination Act, but of course, as you all know, implementation takes time. And there are still lots of ongoing issues with these, which I think some of you here will speak about in more detail. For 50s women, there was an absolutely huge earnings gap. There was no free childcare, no rights to flexible working. Women who were on quite low salaries had no incentive to go back to work. Many had no access to pension schemes, and auto-enrolment came too late for us in 2012. Resulting in a pay gap, which is now 14.3%, and a gender pensions gap, which is still about 35%, and actually was even bigger for 50s women. So there's been some progress, which will benefit mainly younger women, but it seems to me that any new measures from a woman's point of view, there's always a yes, but, and there's always something missing. Often it's adequate funding. It seems to me that we're often thrown a few crumbs, possibly to self-consciences of those in power, until the next cut comes along that disproportionately impacts on women. So what do 50s women actually want? Well, we want to be included. We want government to attend mediation talks with all groups and to look at the discrimination that we've suffered. At the moment, it seems to me that government is hiding behind the Parliamentary Ombudsman, who is investigating over 7 years partial maladministration. But it seems to be leading nowhere. It seems certainly not to be leading to justice. So they seem, the Parliamentary Ombudsman, they seem to be arguing about, did we know about the changes and what decisions did we make that could have been made differently if we'd had more notice? Well, I don't think that it makes any difference because we had too little time. Women who were on low pay, failing health, increasing caring responsibilities, didn't have any opportunity to make different decisions. It's all about discrimination. And government knows this because we've had the CEDAW People's Tribunal, which has found irrefutable evidence of direct and indirect discrimination. Frank Field has told Parliament back in 2016 that 50s women have been grotesquely disadvantaged by the changes. That's important. They've been disadvantaged by the changes. The second thing that we want is, of course, economic empowerment. We want CEDAW to be implemented. Two things that I'm particularly interested in is that we're waiting for the government to properly promote substantive equality that looks at outcomes as well as opportunities. And we're waiting for them to dismantle or refrain from enacting laws or measures that negatively impact on women. Health warning here, brace yourselves for the impact of the budget. And we want equity, we want fairness. Why is it that government seems to think that gender neutral policies tick the equality box? Not for me, they don't. We want impact assessments that take account of gender and women's caring responsibilities. Women are always negatively impacted by any new measures, it seems. And we want to be valued. 162 billion is the contribution that's made in unpaid caring, and it seems to me that that's just not valued. So, all in all, I support the Women's Bill of Rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Kris Gibson. And now I'd like to call on Charley-Anne Gordon-Gardner.
I thank the Chair for giving us the opportunity to debate this motion today. When stressing the importance of incorporating CEDAW into domestic legislation, it is vital to consider the economic issues that affect women, including, for example, discussions of the wage gap, pension age, pension gap, and economic abuse, which is, of course, a non-exhaustive list. Yet there is a group of women who are continually excluded from the conversation. I am speaking of disabled and neurodivergent women. Being disabled and neurodivergent is not synonymous with being unable to work. Yet the employment rate of disabled women in the UK is only 53.5%. Now, this is compared to an employment rate of 79.4% for non-disabled women. This disability employment gap results in a profound issue of disabled women being economically inactive. This is a systemic issue. It begins at birth. Women give birth to babies who are diagnosed with a genetic condition or have children who subsequently develop a health condition or a disability. They are told not to expect that child to be a contributing member of society. As disabled children age, many are placed in special education settings, where the focus is on vocational skills. The idea is that if a disabled person can work, their potential stretches to blue-collar jobs. Special education settings and the policies governing their procedures are complicit in the lack of social mobility observed within the disabled community. My passion for this issue actually stems from my own experience. Whilst my medical condition was not affecting me physically, I was a high achieving student in the Gifted and Talented programme and being shoehorned into the Oxford track. As soon as I became unwell and I needed mobility aids and subsequently needed reasonable adjustments at school, I was actually told that I needed to leave my school as, I quote, they were unable to support somebody with my needs, and I would never successfully achieve any A-levels. With no special educational setting offering the calibre of education I needed, I was left to homeschool myself. And I admit I have been extremely lucky to have in later life have had access to a stellar education, and I am now in steady employment. This is due to the support of, at first, the higher education setting that I attended, and now through my employer and their realisation that my capabilities are not dependent upon my physical abilities. And again, I stress I'm fortunate to be in this position, and I refer you back to the statistics I referenced earlier. Over 50% of disabled women are out of work. The government recently announced plans to address benefit claimants who are disabled and registered as long-term sick and not working. Within this announcement, the burden was placed on disabled individuals without adequate recognition for the true reasons why disabled individuals are out of work, including inaccessible transport, employer attitudes, inaccessible buildings, inflexible working policies, an access to work scheme that exists, but that employers are reluctant to engage with due to the cost implications, and generally a failure to make reasonable adjustments. Crucially, the issue lies with societal attitudes towards disability rather than a disabled person's lack of desire to work. Other than the obvious inability to engage economically with society and the continual reinforcement of disabled women within the lower socioeconomic classes, I ask you, what are the wider reaching effects of this issue? I focus on one particular consequence of the economic restrictions faced by disabled women, and that is the increased vulnerability to domestic abuse. The latest ONS survey reports that disabled women are more than twice as likely to have experienced domestic abuse as non-disabled women. Now, this is a comparison of 17.3% to 7%. This issue is compounded by the economic restrictions disabled women are faced with as a result of their inability to engage economically with society. This puts disabled women at a higher risk for economic abuse, entwined with coercive control, with abusers using finances as a leverage to entrap disabled women in abusive relationships. Without the economic freedom afforded to the rest of society, the economic deprivation becomes an insurmountable hurdle to leaving an abusive relationship. The option of a refuge may arise, but for many disabled women, the lack of a universal, adequate disabled access within the refuge themselves means that yet another barrier is placed against freedom for the perpetrator. I stress my support for this motion, whilst also highlighting the governmental responsibility to actively work towards the full inclusion of the issues facing disabled women to be integrated within the conversation of women's economic rights. The discussion of equal opportunities in regard to women's economic empowerment must include all women. And this cannot be achieved without an accurate and adequate discussion of disabled women's economic rights.
Thank you.
I thank you.
Thank you, Charley-Anne Gordon-Gardner. Thank you. And now I'd like to ask Dr. Cynthia Umezulike to present her contribution. Thank you.
Thank you to the Women's Parliament and of course my mentor, Dr. Jocelyn, for this wonderful opportunity to speak. Today I will be speaking on the topic towards a gender-responsive climate action in addressing human rights violations of garment workers. In my grassroots work as an activist, I immediately discovered that this billion-dollar world of fashion and garment supply chain I love is built on the enslaved backbones of women garment workers. The garment workers who slave behind the scenes and anchor the glitz and glamour of the luxury fashion industry and the fast fashion garment supply chains are overlooked, maltreated, and subjected to human rights violations. The more shocking discovery is that all the brands we know, all the brands we wear, and all the brands we love and support are complicit in disregarding human rights standards by implementing unfair labor practices and refuse to pay for damages. We can also recall the scandal from the exploitative working environment and the horrific Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh in 2014. That collapse was name-tagged mass industrial homicide and the worst industrial disaster in the history of the textile industry. This factory building collapse killed over 1,000 garment workers, and with over 2,000 garment workers sustaining life-altering injuries. The Rana Plaza employed 5,000 garment workers at the time and housed factories for the international brands we all patronize, from Zara to Benetton, Mango, Matalan, Primark, and Walmart. And I can say 11 years post the Rana Plaza collapse, majority of these brands still refuse to take accountability and rejected paying settlements to the families of the victims. It is pertinent to note that I no longer wear, support, or patronize any of these brands. Another odious discovery is that these billion-dollar garment supply manufacturing factories are headquarters in countries ranked in the top 10 climate risk index, which means that climate change is a critical issue in those countries, and women working in those regions are vulnerable and susceptible to socioeconomic hardships and human rights violations. We're talking about countries like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Thailand, and most of Asia. The International Labour Organization noted the connection between climate change and gender-based violence, which increase socioeconomic vulnerabilities of female garment workers. The United Nations Office of the High Commission on Human Rights recommends a gender-based climate action to reduce inequality, prioritizing equitable resources for women, and recognizing the gender difference in needs and capacities with regards to climate crisis. In the reality of the dark back end of garment supply chains, we must acknowledge some movement towards a rights-based fashion industry. A good example is the recovery of $1 million in wages for 165 California garment workers. In Bangladesh, we see Bangladesh-based garment manufacturers, 7 brands such as ASOS, H&M, and Next, recently committed to reinstating garment workers who were purportedly dismissed for attempting to establish a trade union. A total of 100 global brands recently and retailers have now committed to the Pakistan Accord on health and safety in the garment industry to enhance workplace health and safety and reduce machine-related risk, injuries, and exposures to harmful chemicals. In the EU, we now have the EU Green Deal, which mandates supply chains to implement due diligence, which recognizes the impact of climate change and emphasizes a shift towards responsible business practices in the workplace. Non-compliance companies risk product confiscation, denial of EU market access, and potential fines up to 4% of annual turnover in the EU. Although we are witnessing some positive right-based movement, more must be done, and I make the following recommendations. First, we must prioritize garment workers' welfare, and it is crucial in times of climate and environmental disaster. Labor practices must be transparent and accountable and properly audited. Human rights due diligence must include an environmental diversity that takes into consideration biodiversity, CO2 emissions, and transparency mechanisms, ensuring freedom and the right to join trade unions for the protection of interests and participation of garment workers will amplify their voice to collectively negotiate fair wages and improve working conditions. Human rights standards must include gender perspectives that mitigate risks such as forced labor, occupational hazards, modern-day slavery, extending to environmental rights, impacting human rights and welfare. Finally, in alignment with today's Women's Parliament motion, I advocate for a gender-responsive climate action, which recognizes garment workers' participation and, most importantly, their voice, reinforcing the collective need for socioeconomic empowerment to bridge wage gap, end wage theft, and the provision of a conducive working environment in the aftermath of climate crisis to foster a sustainable and equitable environment. I therefore call on states and governments to draw from universally ratified international treaties on human rights, marking a shift from voluntary corporate social responsibility to legislate compliance. I hereby support this motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Umezulike. And now I'd like to call on Dr. Agnieszka Rutkowska.
Thank you. Misogyny can keep women at lower social status than men. This must change. Misogyny is deeply ingrained in society. It manifests within modern workplaces and is particularly noticeable in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM fields, through various channels, including unconscious gender bias in leadership roles, our view of the society on engineering and technology that discourages women from the STEM fields, cultural and social expectations that exclude women from STEM-related careers. These factors contribute to the underrepresentation of women in science and engineering. We need a systematic and measurable change to address these biases and create a more inclusive environment for everyone to thrive. Kate Mann from Cornell University reveals misogyny as a tool to control women and enforcing patriarchal norms through penalties. She insists on systematic reforms to combat misogyny, unconscious bias, and sexism beyond individual success stories. In STEM, we call on global and local organizations and decision makers to unite and implement measurable and actionable strategies to promote inclusion, equity, and diversity at work. In the extremely individualized world dynamics, we are undergoing a tech revolution, artificial intelligence. The promised increased efficiency at work comes at a price, the immediate need for upskilling and reskilling. The FlexiJobs 2023 report shows a clear gender AI gap, with 54% of men using technology in their daily lives, compared with only 35% of women. This divide not only reflects existing biases, but also impedes women's advancements in tech-oriented fields. To counteract this, comprehensive training and equitable access to opportunities are essential. Both women and men require equal mentoring programs, shared resources, and networking opportunities. Also, hiring practices need to be actively redesigned. As a committed member of the Cambridge Association of Women in Science and Engineering, CAMWISE Steering Committee, with over a decade of experience in the STEM field, I've spearheaded initiatives aimed at closing the gender gap in professional environments. CAMWISE's mentoring programs and career development workshops are evidence of our dedication to nurturing a supportive ecosystem for all genders in STEM. And as inclusive, diverse, and equitable, this year's cohort gathered over 60 participants, including women mentees from Ukraine and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as UK. Our events are open to everyone, though, and we particularly welcome male participants, who we see as our allies in empowering women in their careers. Despite our efforts, we are fully aware that more needs to be done for full equal participation of women in workplaces. Studies reveal persistent gender biases and discrimination in workplaces, highlighting the need for concentrated effort and partnerships. Aligning with UN Women, we advocate that gender equality benefits everyone, fostering workplaces that are not only more productive, but also contribute to economic growth, sustainability, social well-being, and mental health. In the digital era, we face an unprecedented opportunity to accelerate and achieve gender equality that is fair, effective, and transparent. The proposed actions include introducing work flexibility and equality for all, promoting role models, seeing women in leadership positions helps drive culture change and social acceptance, enhancing transparency in organization policies and reporting, implementing gender-neutral guidelines for career advancement, adopting inclusive and unbiased recruitment practices, standardizing salaries and conducting regular reviews to eliminate the pay gap, implementing educational and training programs that address and mitigate unconscious bias, establishing clear, enforceable policies against social discrimination, diversifying leadership and decision-making boards, creating workspaces where ideas and contributions are valued equally, regardless of gender, enabling equitable funding opportunities for researchers with special emphasis on supporting caregivers. Thus, I call on organizations, leaders, and community members to unite and make a change urgently and accountability. We need to take measurable actions. We need to monitor and quantify the progress regularly and collectively. Let us build a society where everyone can strive, where gender equality is not just a goal, but a foundational principle. We need to ensure a more inclusive, equitable, and prosperous future for all. The time to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Agnieszka Rutkowska. Thank you. And now I'd like to call on, call on Alison Huizeling to present her submission to the Women's Parliament.
So, my talk to you this afternoon is on Mind the Gap. Why mind the gap? Well, this is an audible phrase on London Underground platforms to prepare people for the gap between the train doorways and the platform edge. Most of the stations were built in Victorian England. However, today I'm going to talk to you about the gap, a different gap, the gap between men and women in modern day Britain in regards to their pension calculations. This is estimated to be circa £160,000 in their occupational private pension pots. That source was from the Sunday Times Money on the 25th of February 2024. My intuition suggests that this figure is underestimated. 6 months before that article, I read in the same Sunday newspaper that the government were considering providing workshops for women to ensure that they were financially informed about their pensions. This implication was that the disparity was due to knowledge. Having spent 40 years in financial services and being a working mother myself who managed a household budget, I thought, what an odd conclusion. In the government and the media, are they so uninformed about what is really causing this disparity? It is nothing to do with knowledge or financial acumen. It is the female life cycle and women's circumstances that drive this injustice. There are two elements to consider: the state pension and also occupational and private pensions. Women's earnings and therefore their pension contributions and benefits are impacted by a number of common lifestyle factors. Firstly, in their 20s, 30s and 40s, women have life experiences such as maternity leave, childcare, working patterns, etc. In 2022, 38% of women work part-time compared to 14% of men. Similarly, occupational and private pensions, plus the pre-2016 additional state pensions, are all based on earnings and how much a person can afford to contribute. Women are therefore carrying a significant deficit in their earnings. In order to address this, employers and governments will need to consider options such as maintaining employee, not just employer contributions during maternity leave, but also contributing full-time equivalent employer contributions for part-time workers. Next in the female life cycle comes the divorce. 50% of women born in the UK in the 60s and 70s are now divorced. At the time of their divorce, when many professionals such as mediators, solicitors and indeed judiciary are making choices for women, they are asked to make the awful choice between providing a home for their young children now or a share of their husband's future pension. Unsurprisingly, they forfeit their husband's future pension, leaving a huge disparity at retirement. Similarly, unmarried mothers are exceptionally vulnerable at being left with no income equity if they are renting and no spousal pension provision. Whilst it is too late, probably, for some generations of women, the government should intervene on this matter and ensure that the practice stops for future generations of women. Equity from a home should be shared. Pension pots from a home should be shared during divorce. If this is not workable, other solutions should be found. Next comes the menopause in the life cycle. Evidence indicates that the menopause years 50 plus, 40% of women are leaving the workforce environments, resulting in a loss of pension contributions during peak earning years and impacting their financial pensionable salary, which is key to the final salary pension schemes that they will receive. Companies recently are very proud of saying they have menopause policies to assist women in giving polished PowerPoint presentations that look and sound very good. The statistics for women leaving in the workforce in their 50s does not correlate to all the good work that is being done. The government is in the position to implement statute legislation to help over 50 state employment, restructuring in companies so that women aged 50 plus are pushed out could carry a requirement to enhance their pension pots until the normal state pension age. Potentially this could help the government achieve its aim of retaining more 50 plus women in the workforce. The next lifestyle event comes in retirement, where there is a disparity in relation to the previous generations of women. The state earning related pensions were based on evidence that shows women's pay was not equal to men during this time. In 2016, the state pension changes removed the earnings-based additional state pension, but ignored the cruel legacy that the pension deficit for hundreds of thousands of women who worked between 1978 and 2016. If women have no private or occupational pension, which is typical for stay-at-home mothers and part-time mothers in the 1960 years, they will now be retiring at an age of 67/68. And some of these women will be in manual low-paid work, cleaning, agriculture, etc., where this will become very difficult as at that age. It has been 50 years since the Equal Pay and Sex Discrimination Acts were put in place. However, report suggests on the gender pay gap in 2023 that women's pay is still 7.7% below the 40 plus years even in this country. Women born in April 1950 onwards have seen their state pension rise from 60 to 60, state pension age rise from 60 to 65 plus. For those born in the 60s, this has risen to 67. These are the women who had to fight for equal pay, sex equality, pension rights of part-time workers, etc., who will now be less likely to build up earnings-related additional state pensions, as well as occupational and private pensions. Their retirement has made this harder for them. The 60-year-olds will be £60,000 worse off than the previous generation because of this change. I acknowledge that a single state pension age for men and women is a fair principle, but in the generation of women being impacted, there are those with much lower occupational and private pension provisions. In other words, it was brought on too soon. Although this decision was taken to judicial review by women, the High Court ruled in 2019 in favour of the government that this was fair. It is completely fair to men and sustainable to the government. However, the expert evidence failed to spot the huge disparity between the financial outcomes of retirement for women and men in the next 20 years due to private and occupational pensions, which for women now will be significantly lower. In other words, they only looked at the state pension provisions, not the outcomes. There are less well-publicised cases such as Lloyds Banking Group Pension Trustees versus Lloyds Bank PLC and others, where as a result of the High Court ruling, private and occupational pensions they're busy remediating pension schemes, which unfortunately will also make women's pensions worse off. In conclusion, women have a different life cycle to men, which impact their earnings, income potential and contributions, and hence pension outcomes. To address this imbalance, it is high time that the government introduce legislation to protect women from this injustice. Women should have the right to a family, the right to a home, to have better financial outcomes later in life because of these life cycles. The alternative is poor health, shorter life expectancy, and this is one gap that needs addressing immediately. This feels like Victorian England, so please let's fix that gap. For this reason, I support the motion today, and thank you for hearing my voice on this matter.
Thanks so much, Alison. Thank you. And now I'd like to call on Sonali Bhujun to present her position. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I would like to bring your attention today with a call to action on a matter of utmost importance. The urgent need to transpose the provisions of the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women into domestic law, thereby establishing a comprehensive women's Bill of Rights. Let us delve into the critical themes of economic rights and independence, particularly focusing on the intersections of reproduction rights and economic empowerment. Reproduction rights are fundamental to women's economic autonomy. Yet, persistent barriers such as limited access to reproductive health care, unequal family leave policies, and workplace discrimination undermine women's ability to make informed choices about their reproductive health while maintaining economic stability. Evidence shows that these barriers disproportionately affect marginalized communities, exacerbating existing inequality. It is imperative that we address this systematic injustice through legislative action. By integrating reproduction rights into the Women's Bills of Rights, we can ensure that every woman has the freedom to make reproductive choices without compromising her economic stability. Furthermore, we must recognize the importance of comprehensive policy that support reproductive rights as integral to women's economic empowerment. This includes ensuring access to reproductive healthcare services, implementing fair family leave policies, and combating workplace discrimination. As conclusion today, I urge this esteemed Assembly to champion the cause of women's rights by advocating for the transpositions of CEDAW provision into domestic law, including robust protections for reproduction rights within the Women's Bills of Rights. Let us seize this opportunity to uphold the principles of equality and justice, ensuring that every woman in our nation can thrive economically. Together, let's pave the way for a more inclusive and equitable future. As such, I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonali Bhujun. Thank you. And now I'd like to call on Dr. Natalie Turney to present her support of the motion.
Thank you, Chair. In a recent article by Katie Yagionika, influenced by Penny Reid, she said, "Women should not set themselves on fire to keep others warm." Yagionika advanced this mantra in the context of the expectation of women to be nice, quiet, agreeable, that men react whereas women overreact. Yagionika discusses the January 2024 Golden Globes, where the male host made a joke about Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift was caught on camera. She didn't find the joke funny, so she didn't laugh, she just sipped her drink. But you don't find a joke funny, you don't laugh, right? This was immediately lambasted as an overreaction. But the mantra, women should not set themselves on fire to keep others warm, is something so close to home because it impacts all areas of our lives. According to UN Women, in a report of late 2023, by 2050, women globally will spend 9.5% more time on unpaid care and domestic work than men. That is 2.3 hours more per day per woman. 2.3 hours. This takes the mantra from setting ourselves on fire to burning out at an exponential rate. And burnout isn't exclusive to women. It's been recognised by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon. The charity Mental Health UK recently released their burnout report of 2024, and it reveals a brutal but unsurprising account. The report shows that 91% of adults in the UK report experiencing high or extreme levels of stress or pressure in the last year, with 1 in 5 needing to take time off work due to poor mental health as a result. Yet women find themselves greater affected. Women were found to be 5 percentage points more likely than men to experience high or extreme levels of pressure or stress, yet a higher percentage of men stated that they took time off work. And though the UN Women forecasted figures on unpaid care and domestic work are grave, the extent to which women are impacted in their employment further compounds the issue. According to the burnout report, women are 7 percentage points more likely than men to experience a high or increased amount of workload of tasks unpaid, and 6 percentage points more likely to regularly work beyond their contracted hours. Speaking on the risk of burnout does not even begin to cover the significant repercussions of this reality on the gender pay gap, the pensions gap, and so forth. The Working Time Regulations 1998, in theory, set a restriction on this, yet the reality is that post-COVID especially, many workers are stretched beyond their workload. Companies relying on goodwill of employees and enforcement of these stretched workloads are exhausting their staff mentally and physically. The Health and Safety Executive is responsible for enforcing the regulations, but it is itself under-resourced and struggling to keep pace with the occupational phenomenon. The Department of Work and Pensions is itself under the spotlight recently, and that's because civil servants are complaining that they are struggling due to unbearable workloads and improper staffing levels. Companies, government agencies, employers, they all find their resources stretched for a number of reasons: the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, and so on. But there is an obligation, legal and moral, to safeguard the health of employees through robust internal policy and accountability on workload management and compliance with working hours. Mental health issues arising as a result of pressure and stress is itself an epidemic. We need companies to lead in forcing change through raising the standards of the workplace. We need the government to divert resources to addressing this crisis. We need women to be at the forefront of policy and decision making in order to ensure that we are not left behind in this pursuit for better health and equality for all. For that reason, I support the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Natalie Turney. And now I'd like to call on Yulia Gulyaeva.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here to speak on the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence
which demonstrate clearly the urgent need for legislative framework addressing AI-related difficulties, of which there are undoubtedly many. Today, though, I'm here to speak on AI-driven gender bias, which comes as a result of a lack of representation. This bias not only mirrors but also magnifies the existing gender gap, which has potential to snowball into further socioeconomic sliding of women and their persistent underrepresentation in STEM fields. The global technology sector, particularly within AI and data sciences, evidences a stark gender imbalance. According to research by the World Economic Forum, women represent only 22% of AI professionals globally, and even less in technical roles within AI development. On top of that, a recent report by McKinsey State of AI 2022 revealed that only a third of AI-related companies have active programs or initiatives to increase diversities within this field. Now, in the past, some have argued that perhaps women are not interested in STEM careers, so why incentivize them if they don't want to partake? To begin with, according to reports by the American Association of University Women and MIT Professional Education, the underrepresentation of women in STEM is a result of multiple factors, which includes stereotyping, lack of role models, unconscious bias, and work-life balance, which collectively discourages women from pursuing and remaining in STEM careers. Further, unfortunately, this lack of representation of women in STEM fields has significant repercussions, not only for women, which limits individual opportunities, but also inclusivity and efficacy of technological advancements as a whole. The impact of this gender imbalance extends to the development of technologies, including AI. For instance, according to the ALI Social Impact Review from Harvard, facial recognition technologies have been found to exhibit biases against Black women, and medical funding algorithms have shown discrimination against Black patients, thanks in part both to the biases caused by skewed data sets and the lack of diversity on AI development teams. Over the last few years, new AI applications have been developed with the aim of saving time and money, although instead some have led to real-world harm, of which I will give you now some examples. In 2019, Apple and Goldman, I believe it's pronounced Sachs, applied an algorithm to help determine and assign credit limits to those applying for a card. In one case, this algorithm set a credit limit for a husband which was 20 times higher than that offered to his wife. This happened despite the couple filing joint taxes and the woman possessing considerably better credit than her husband. This was posted on Twitter, and a variety of users responded with similar experiences where the woman was disadvantaged. In 2016, a software program used to attach risk assessment scores, which was used in a Florida court, and it continuously marked Black defendants as a higher risk than their white counterparts. For example, a white 41-year-old male who was a seasoned criminal scored a 3, while a young Black woman with only a minor juvenile offense scored an 8 out of 10. Finally, for probably the most pertinent example, Amazon set up a recruitment AI in 2015 only to abandon the project in 2017 because the AI was prejudiced against women. Now, according to Reuters, the reason this AI was prejudiced, as it turns out, was because the AI was trained on predominantly male resumes, which was submitted to Amazon over the course of a 10-year period prior. Consequently, the AI concluded that men were preferable. It then downgraded resumes containing the words women and filtered out candidates who attended women's own colleges. These biases are no longer just theoretical concerns. They have real-world implications affecting everything from personal security and privacy to healthcare and employment opportunities. It is not unforeseeable with the speed of current technological developments that these negative effects will grow exponentially if they are not addressed now. The UK's commitment to the principles of the CEDAW requires a re-evaluation and restructuring of current legislative and policy frameworks to ensure that they are responsive to challenges posed by AI technology. Incorporating CEDAW's provision into the UK law would facilitate a more equitable foundation for crafting policies that actively promote gender equality in the AI sector and beyond. Corporate accountability in the ethical development of AI systems is also crucial. This includes careful consideration of the data sets used to train AI to avoid perpetuating existing biases and ensure that development teams are diverse and inclusive. Given the heightened risk of job displacement due to automation, with women facing an 11% risk compared to 9% for men, according to the McKinsey Global Institute, Proactive measures must be taken to safeguard women's employment in the evolving digital economy. Transposing CEDAW into the UK law, while also focusing on countering AI-driven bias, would not only reinforce the UK's commitment to eliminating gender discrimination, but also position the UK as a leader in promoting an inclusive digital future for all. As such, I support this motion.
Thanks so much, Yulia Gulyaeva. And now I'd like to call on Debbie Allen.
Good afternoon. My name is Debbie Allen. I'm a mother and an activist, entrepreneur, not by choice. My mother, Beryl Joyce Lewin from Maypen, Jamaica, wanted me to work in an office. She thought I would be safe there. My motion is racism and women in the workplace. In 2018, I had an experience where somebody was tampering with my equipment and my work and leaving feces and bananas. I'm so grateful to the Morning Star for picking that story up. That was 2018. That experience caused a nervous breakdown where I couldn't leave my bed, much less my bedroom. I couldn't look after my children. I couldn't look after my home. That was a couple of years out of the workplace. And I was silenced from telling that story. It was further compounded when I lost my eldest daughter and then partner and then his father, this government. I'm amazed at how resilient I am that I've kind of bounced back, but I know that I have mental health issues because of that experience. I still suffer with insomnia, and so I'm grateful for the voice that all of us women have been given today to talk about what we've experienced. I used to be a bit of an arty person, and like I said, my mum steered me away, but because of the insomnia, I just create and I write, and at 3 a.m. in the morning, I'm doing crazy things, and when I wake up, I really don't know what I've done, but I've organised events at Wembley Stadium and other iconic buildings, and this has what saved me, the creativity that another part of my brain is working with. And you know what came out of all of that harassment? I can't work in a workplace because I'm hypervigilant now. I'm scared to be. I'm more aware of microaggressions, things where other women maybe can brush off, but for me, it's like another mosquito bite that tears at my self-confidence. I'm sorry, again, I've attended without the statistics, but if you go to the McGregor-Smith Race at Work report and the Baroness Casey race report, and various other race reports, people like me, women, Black, mental health, we don't fare well in the workplace. And I believe that leaves us as a target. I support this motion wholeheartedly. Every year that I'm called, I will come and support. And I'd like to leave you with something that I put together, and it's called Please Take the Knee. And in all my mental health, I do want to thank Metropolitan Police for supporting some of the activities that my brain puts together. I'm telling you, it's not me. So we give thanks. Okay. This is on Amazon, a little plug here. So please take the knee, unfinished. Set your timer. We're going to kneel for Floyd. The crowd at the rally graciously stooped. Who could be annoyed? How about you, officers? Aren't you joining in? Yeah, they had to. It would be a sin. Passers-by quickly knew what we were doing. All around the world, take the knee ensuing. After about 3 minutes, a cramp set in my right butt, Elders started twisting, but they kept their mouths shut. My knees started tingling, body weight set nerves off. I tried to master discomfort with a little twist cough. For the elders, those with health issues and sciatica, this discomfort could not matter. One took out a kerchief and mopped her brow. Can the youth of today take this baton now? Our elders came through insults, being spat at and beatings, the type of racism that was not fleeting. No blacks, no dogs, no Irish, go back home. Not many shared this pain, they journeyed alone. And so the fact that there was no sharing, how have we prepared the next generation in caring? After 6 minutes, I turned to my mentor and gave a perturbed glance. My God, I gasped. He didn't stand a chance. If we can't kneel without stretching and twisting, how did that officer manage to leave his knee in? It's murder, I said. Who can disagree? Lock that racist up and throw away the key. Across the waters and here in the UK, brutality, racism, nepotism happens every day. Black lives matter. All lives matter. Women matter. And I pray that this movement is more than a distraction. People, you need to get involved. We need to take action. Every bullying, harassment, sexual incident, any microaggression, report it all, talk your truth, heal from their transgressions. How will anyone know if we don't talk? How can there be healing, learning, understanding if you don't talk your walk? Your journey, triumphs and pain, receive your accolades and bear your shame. But it's not shameful to her. You are human, and this alien behaviour must be drawn from the dirt. I support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you, Debbie Allen. And now I'd like to call on Maryam Namazie to the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I'm really grateful for the contributions we heard earlier. They've been very insightful. I wanted to speak to you about Sharia courts and how they adversely affect women's rights here in the UK and England. And of course, we know that there's been austerity, cost of living, cuts in legal aid, and how these have disproportionately affected women's rights and diminished women's rights. And of course, it's impacted women's access to justice. And I think this is something that we see especially when it comes to often minoritized women. Very often now women have to do it themselves because of these cuts, and it's very difficult to do that. And I think as a result, a lot of women are being forced into going to religious courts like the Sharia courts, where some of the greatest violations of Black and minoritized women's rights are taking place, even though we hear very little about it. We look at the numbers of women going to these courts, which were established since the 80s. There are thousands upon thousands, according to the court's own statistics. And much of it, unfortunately, the rights violations that are taking place are under the radar. There's very little scrutiny, and the very few investigations and parliamentary investigations into the issue didn't really reach any conclusions and didn't really take any action. And I think if you look at these courts, you see how there's a huge level of discrimination against women, and also the legitimization and encouragement even of violence against women. I think one of the main issues that we face is that in a Sharia court, a woman's testimony is considered half that of a man's, and therefore already to begin with, women and men are not on equal standing. And if women don't want to attend these courts, very often it's not voluntary. And there's a lot of pressure and intimidation forcing women to go to these courts. And when women decide they don't want to go or they don't want to comply, they're faced with shunning, which is equivalent to long-term psychological torture, really. And also the fact that they might be considered apostates or people who are not abiding by religious rules, even if they are religious. And if they don't agree with the court's ruling, oftentimes they're told there's no right to appeal and they just have to accept it. And just to give you a couple of examples that these courts deal with, for example, is polygamy, divorce, issues on divorce where men have unilateral right to divorce and women have very limited rights to divorce. On the question of domestic violence, very often the judges will tell women that they're to blame for the violence that they face. With regards to child custody, women only have access to child custody until a certain age. After that, it's given to the father, irrespective of child welfare and the needs of the child. They also deal with child marriage. They say they don't, but they consider anyone a woman after she reaches puberty, and therefore, effectively, it is child marriage. On the issue of inheritance, for example, girls and women get half that of men. I think just to explain that they call themselves courts, those presiding call themselves judges, and we have investigated the links between these courts and the religious right that uses these courts, particularly in the area of family law, to control and to manage women. They're using the Arbitration Act, even though it's not legal to do that in family matters. It is not illegal, and I think that's one of the problems. There's no political will to put women's rights above cultural rights, above the rights of the religious right, really. And the use of cultural relativism as a policy, a public policy, and multi-faithism to give them precedence over women's rights. And I think it's important for a Women's Bill of Rights to call for the abolition of not just Sharia courts, but also the Beth Din, which are the Jewish courts. Religious courts really don't have a place in deciding on women's rights and in family matters. And I think it's important to recognize that if we want to defend the rights of BME women and to give equal access to women and all women to justice. As such, I support and second the motion. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Maryam Namazie. Thank you. And now I'd like to call on Afeefa Salehmohamed.
Ladies and the one gentleman present, as we gather here to discuss the advancement of women's rights, it is imperative that we reflect on the challenges that persist and the avenues through which we can effect meaningful change. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, stands as a beacon of hope in the quest for gender equality. Enshrined within its provisions are the principles that guide us toward a world where women are afforded the same rights and opportunities as their male counterparts. However, economic disparities continue to plague women in the UK. For instance, the gender pay gap persists and has been worsening since COVID, with women earning, on average, 15% less than men. This disparity widens for women of colour and those with disabilities. Moreover, the pensions gap further exacerbates these issues, leaving women financially stranded, vulnerable in their later years. In the UK, women's pensions are on average 40% lower than men's, reflecting interruptions in their careers due to caregiving responsibilities and part-time work.
Moreover, as we navigate the digital age, we are confronted with new challenges and opportunities. The rise of artificial intelligence and technological advancement holds immense promise, yet it also presents risks. Biases inherent in AI algorithms and search engines threaten to perpetuate existing inequalities, amplifying the marginalization of women and marginalized communities. Studies have shown that AI algorithms can reflect and even exacerbate societal biases, leading to discriminatory outcomes, particularly for women and minority groups. For us to be able to use AI, programmers need to code it. If programmers are men, whether it's voluntary or not, their biases and sub-biases will be reflected in the AI code. Artificial intelligence, with time, will analyze those biases and sub-biases and exacerbate them, widening the numerous existing gaps between men and women, and ultimately white women and women of color. AI will only serve to exacerbate social, cultural, and professional gaps between men and women, since the root of the problem is not addressed. We need more women in STEM professions. They need to be empowered to enter STEM. This is a systemic issue, especially within tech companies, requiring another debate. The pursuit of gender equality demands our unwavering commitment and collective action. We must advocate for the rights of women under CEDAW, with particular attention to economic disparities and technological biases, two issues that require our imminent attention given the current economic and technological landscapes. Implementing CEDAW in current law will provide a framework to the government on how to address the issues that women face in the professional world and the social realm. As we embark on this journey towards equality, let us remember the words of Audre Lorde, a quote that I personally try to live up to. I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. Let us stand in solidarity, united in our commitment to advancing the rights and dignity of women everywhere. Therefore, I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Afeefa Salehmohamed. And now I'd like to invite Gabrielle Ajobena.
Thank you, Chairman. In her work on poverty and ethnicity in the UK, Lucinda Platt coined the term ethnic penalty. This is the poverty and socioeconomic disadvantage that minority groups face as a result of their ethnicity. Structural inequality extends beyond the criminal justice system, and it delves into every area of life, from work to schools to healthcare. Starting off with a few statistics, according to the European Commission, across Europe in 2021, the gender pay gap difference was around 12.7% in favor of men. However, for ethnic minority women, the gap is even more alarming, increasing to 25%, as highlighted by the Law Society. The Office for National Statistics sheds more light on this disparity, reporting that while white women earn on average £14 per hour, ethnic minority women on average earn £12 per hour. Addressing the racial wage and pension pay gap calls for a multifaceted approach. This could involve implementing affirmative action policies to promote diversity and inclusion within organizations, fostering mentorship programs tailored to the needs of ethnic minority women, and enhancing educational and skill-building opportunities to empower them economically. Moving on from issues regarding the wage and pension gap, although prevalent, I will now speak on violence against ethnic minority women. In Belaw's research, he found that there is a major under-policing of domestic abuse within minority communities, the reason for this being cultural sensitivity. There are several other factors, such as underreporting, mistrust of police, honor-based killings, and many more. Ashara Turi and others define honor-based violence as a crime or incident which has or may be committed to protect or defend the honor of the family or of a family or a community. It incorporates a range of violent behaviors from forced marriages and female genital mutilations to killings. Cases such as the death of Banaz Mahmoud are proof of this. The Office on National Statistics released in 2019 a finding that white victims represented 5.6% of the victim population, Asian and Asian British people made up 3.8%, and Black victims made up 7.1%, whilst mixed race victims made up 12.9%. However, we have to take this with a grain of salt and the understanding that in the UK, only less than 24% of domestic abuse crimes are actually reported. While ethnicity is not adjacent to domestic violence experiences of the ethnic community, while ethnicity is not adjacent to the domestic violence experiences of the ethnic community, of ethnic minority women, Aisha Gill identified that it can often be a core component of said abuse, and some have argued that it may even compound the effects of the abuse. This can be explained through the concept of intersectionality, which recognizes that victims from minority ethnic backgrounds often experience the world, including domestic violence, differently to their white counterparts, as they are having to contend with further barriers due to race, pointed out by Pragma Patel and Hanana Siddiqui in their work. As far as solutions go, we need to again include within the section a section within CEDAW that speaks to the extra care that should be taken when dealing with the violence and domestic abuse faced by ethnic minority women. Recent incentives backed up by the Office of Domestic Abuse Commissioners aim to raise and train GPs, healthcare professionals, teachers, youth workers, police officers, and many more who victims tend to come close in contact to not only spot the signs, but take actions, as oftentimes victims are isolated and may never get the chance to speak out. However, these aims will only work as far as there are laws and policies in place to uphold them. And with that being said, I support this motion.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle Ajobena. And now I'd like to ask Maneeka Bhujun to present her submission.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity. AI disproportionately affects women and girls, especially when it comes to image-based abuse. In 2021, there was a reported 38 million hits on a deepfake website that strips women naked in its first 8 months of operation. Last October, we got the Online Safety Act 2023, designed to protect women from online abuse. But this act fails to protect women and girls adequately. While there are many deficiencies, in the interest of time, I'm focusing on the failure to properly address deepfake technology and cyber flashing. Section 187 and 188 of the Act amended Section 66 of the Sexual Offences Act of 2003. Section 187 added deepfake images and videos as photographs and films to Section 66 of the Sexual Offences Act. Section 188 criminalizes the sharing of deepfake images. I'd like to draw your attention to the word sharing. Sharing is now criminalized, not the creation of the images. Using the likes of people to create such invading photos and videos is not addressed. It is not a criminal activity. The very creation of images without consent should be criminalized. If it is wrong to take someone's picture or video without their consent when they are performing a sexual act or when they're naked, there's no reason why creating such visuals using deepfakes should not be criminalized. This act also criminalizes cyber flashing. This means the sending of images of any person's genitals to another, intending to cause the recipient alarm, distress, or humiliation, or reckless as to whether the recipient will be caused alarm, distress, or humiliation. The threshold of proving intent is very, very high. Many women who have been on the receiving end will not be able to have recourse to justice because proving the intent to cause harm is incredibly high. As many women would know, when you receive such images, there's no warning. Many can claim mistake. It is practically ineffective to protect women and girls against cyberfashing. Evidently, more needs to be done to protect women and girls online. We can even move to an outright ban of using deepfake technology to create such pictures. I recognize that it can be seen as a curtailment on Article 9, freedom of expression, but we have Article 5, right to liberty and security. Freedom of expression should not be at the expense of the security of women and girls. Women and girls make 51% of the UK's population. This issue is about the security of 51% of the UK's population. We need a women's Bill of Rights to better protect women against online abuse. I therefore support the motion. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Maneeka Bhujun. And now I'd like to call Lubna Sakhaar to present. Thank you, Lubna.
Good day, everyone. In August 1983, a crucial time for Burkina Faso's history that sparked a significant revolution for women's rights, President Thomas Sankara led the movement, emphasizing the essential role of women in achieving a standing in society. May I never witness or visit a community where half of the population is oppressed and unable to speak. I am grateful for where we stand today. Comrades, there is no true social revolution without the liberation of women. May my eyes never see and my feet never take me to a society where half of the people are held in silence. His presidency empowered the continent by changing and setting an appropriate minimum age for marriage, allowing divorce by mutual consent, eliminating bride prices, ensuring a widow's right to inherit, prohibiting female genital mutilation, and promoting women in leadership positions, which deviated from traditional practices. As an Arab woman, this particularly hits home for me. Today, in the complex understanding of the worldwide struggle for women's rights, we have outstanding women like Nadia Murad, who bravely fights against sexual violence. We also cannot forget to acknowledge Dorothy Height, who tirelessly dedicated her life to advocating for equal rights for women of all races beyond geographical limitations. The struggle still continues. Many women face obstacles such as the glass ceiling in their careers or experiencing abuse at home. We live in a world whereby 97% of women have been sexually harassed. Reflecting on the advancements like decreased pay inequalities, lower rates of underage marriages, and fewer cases of female genital mutilation, it is clear that the path to equality is still ongoing. Women's rights are still human rights, and we are just being given the fundamentals. We do not talk of women's emancipation as an act of charity or out of a surge of compassion. It is a basic necessity. Sankara claimed that he speaks for women worldwide who endure oppression from a male-dominated system. The pursuit of women's freedom is a collaborative effort, an ongoing battle against institutionalized oppression. Let's respond to the urge to take action. As Sankara stated, freedom can only be achieved through struggle. Let the silence of women's voices transform into a powerful demand for complete and absolute equality. This month on the 8th and every day after, let's reiterate our dedication to the ongoing struggle to ensure that every woman secures her proper position in the world that promotes justice and fairness. I speak on behalf of women all over the world who suffer at the hands of a male-imposed system. Women in struggle proclaim in unison with us that the slave who does not organize his own rebellion deserves no pity for his lot. He alone is responsible for his misfortune if he harbors illusions in the devious assurance in the master's promise of freedom. Freedom can only be won through struggle. We call our sisters of all races to rise to the assault and fight to conquer their rights. We women are revolutionary. Hear the roar of women's silence. As such, I support the motion. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Lubna Sakhaar. And now I'd like to call on Méabh Kirby to present her support of the motion. Thank you.
It was last Thursday that The Guardian launched an expose. It revealed the names connected to an app called Cloth Off, which produces naked photographs of women around the world.
Yet no actual naked photographs were taken of these women. So how is this possible? Well, these photographs were generated by AI. Clotho advertises itself as an app where you can undress girls for free. The app does not ask for the age of the person being undressed. In Spain last year, naked images were generated of schoolgirls and spread on social media. The young girls suffered severe panic attacks, were publicly bullied, and refused to continue attending school. Around the world, deepfake pornography is growing. What should be an episode of Black Mirror is instead a very real phenomenon. The majority of discussions around deepfakes focus on the dangers of manipulation of elections, national security threats, fraudulent misuse in business. This obscures the fact that the most common deepfakes on the internet are non-consensual pornographic images of women. The gender dynamic is clear. While AI has been used to imitate men, it is overwhelmingly targeted at women for the purposes of sexual exploitation. Not only are non-consensual sexual pictures created of women, they are then used against them. Deepfake pornography is a common form of control and intimidation. Now, to tackle this, the UK government has introduced the Online Safety Bill, which legislates for the offence of non-consensual deepfake pornography. But as Maneeka pointed out, this is not enough. First, it is intensely difficult to identify those culpable. Secondly, people involved often live in foreign countries beyond the jurisdictional reach of the UK. And thirdly, most importantly, it's very difficult for women to have these cases taken seriously. So deepfake pornography is just one way in which AI is being used to subjugate, sexualize, and oppress women. Another recent story in the news: police have been investigating the sexual assault of an under 16-year-old girl this year. Now, the difference between this and other sexual assaults in the UK, this was on the metaverse. The underage girl was using a virtual reality headset when she was allegedly gang raped by a group of male avatars. While some commentators have dismissed these events as being not real, this misses the fact that these worlds are designed to be completely immersive. Already there are haptic vests, which allow virtual reality users to feel through buzzes and vibrations. Mark Zuckerberg envisions a metaverse where people can wear full body suits to allow them to feel every sensation imaginable. In the current case, police found that the underage girl experienced similar psychological trauma to that of someone who had been physically raped. A new study predicts that children are likely to spend up to 10 years of their life in virtual reality. And yet this world is already rife with virtual assaults and virtual groping. We are catapulting towards a new immersive digital reality without pausing to consider the very real harms to women and girls. People feel emboldened in online spheres where there are far less repercussions for abuse than in real life. Social media companies are outsourcing the issue to users. Female users fearing assault should use a safe zone to prevent people coming near them in the metaverse, or report the abuse if they're using Horizon Zone. Yet again, women are told that they're the ones that should be preventing their own assaults. AI is being weaponized against women and their bodies. Use of AI is stripping women of the ability to consent, whether through the creation and distribution of naked photographs to non-consensual sexual intercourse online. At present, the Online Safety Bill focuses on content rather than activity. It also doesn't name violence against women and girls as a priority harm. The bill must be adapted to expressly apply to sexual offences carried out in virtual reality worlds. In this new world of digital violations, the lawlessness of virtual reality, we must take action. It is time for the government to tackle these issues through education, regulation, and Women's Bill of Rights. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Maryam Kirby. And now I'd like to invite Rosie Sparkes to do the first edition. Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you. Internal biases against women have always been present in new technologies. Looking back to the 1970s, the book Barriers to Equality in Academia, Women in Computer Science at MIT, outlined the difficulties women were already facing through the misogyny present in their early computer programs. It would appear that significant progress in this way has not occurred. New technology does not necessarily mean new ways of thinking. The impact of AI and its biases on young people needs to be explored. Youth of today are the future of tomorrow, and what they're exposed to now is going to impact policies and the social standing of women in years to come. One of the substantial ways in which AI performs its biased role is through its meme generation. Studies have shown that memes now play a significant role in shaping beliefs of young people, particularly in social development and political discussions. It is not uncommon to see memes and images of women dressed in what is considered racy clothing with a demeaning message underneath, or memes with captions such as "get back in the kitchen" and images depicting violence, insinuating just that the woman's place is in the kitchen or that violence is acceptable. What might seem on the surface like a relatively insignificant joke is not so. More than ever, young people are being exposed to ideas of misogyny and degradation in casual and fun ways, and it is becoming common practice. Often these funny memes hide a much more sinister and divisive message about women's place in society, and the casual spreading of principles of unequal treatment and derisive commentary can only be seen as harmful to the generations of children who are growing up with these images constantly around them. Most AI programs are trained on Leon 5B, which generates information and content from what it has access to on the internet. And while there is an abundance of dangerous commentary encouraging the endurance of gender-based inequality and violence, there is a distinct lack of material combating this, expressing the importance of women's freedoms and rights. If the UK government were to take a stand and introduce policies actively promoting equality, the developers of AI and future technologies will have no choice but to adhere to the regulations in place. Currently, there is little being done to prevent these harmful ideas continuing to spread, which in turn maintains the status quo of a lack of financial freedom and frequent violence against women. In a world of increasing AI, with its generated images and information, routine exposure to misogynistic language and content, however insignificant it may first appear, will lead to children continuing to develop their own internal biases, whether intentional or not, and continue to perpetuate behaviours that highlight the inequality women still face today. Last year, the United Nations Development Programme released their report on the Gender Social Norms Index, which found that nearly 9 out of 10 people globally hold internalised and fundamental biases against women. How are we as a society supposed to change these ingrained perceptions of women if the technology being used in everyday life continues to promote harmful views? This Women's Parliament is demanding that responsibility is taken by the UK government to end the wage and pensions gap, promote equal opportunities for all women in all areas of life, including the workplace, and end sexist harassment. So how does this relate to AI-generated memes and the use of AI generally? Well, Article 5A of CEDAW explicitly states that states parties shall take all appropriate measures to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women with a view to achieving the elimination of prejudices and all other practices which are based on the idea of inferiority or the superiority of either of the sexes or on stereotype roles for men and women. AI mirrors social and cultural patterns, and we have a chance now, while it is still in its relatively early stages, to mould its future development to something that advances fairness and non-discrimination against women. It is well established that we as people are influenced by our surroundings and experiences, particularly throughout our early life. Technology is ever present, and continuous exposure to harmful gender stereotypes, paired with a lack of accountability and response by the UK government to the need for entrenched rights and equal opportunities for women, means that young people are not being given any solid foundation on which to base a more progressive belief system. Only through action and a strong unified stance from those in positions of power will the development of AI be forced to adapt to become a safer space for women, and subsequently allow for further promotion of social progress in all areas. By oppressing women on a technical and social front, women will continue to be oppressed economically and professionally. Women are being told that there is a place for them, but that place is not one of progress. It is not a place of freedom. There is no justification for the continued lack of implementation of CEDAW provisions into domestic law. The UK government must introduce a Women's Bill of Rights to showcase the UK's prioritisation of women's equality and provide a powerful rejection of the biases still present in our society today, in the hope that developing technology and AI can wield positive change rather than continued harm going forward. For that reason, I support the motion.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Rosie Sparkes. And now I'd like to call on Luela Figueira to present her support of the motion. Thank you, Luela.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I would like to talk about funding and resourcing services for women of minority. It is evident in the research that women in minority groups, such as those of color, those being trafficked, asylum seekers, and refugee women, among others, are at a disadvantage and a higher risk of violence because of their unique circumstances. However, even though efforts have been made to create equality between men and women in all areas of our lives, women in minority groups are still in unacceptable numbers, being left with no support and to the mercy of their circumstances. Now, there are a number of reasons why the efforts to equality in regard of the identified groups of women are not as effective, but in the interest of time, I've identified two problematic areas. Firstly, there's the fact that many of these women do not qualify for public funds and are excluded from security and social benefits, which puts them at a higher risk of poverty, which then increases the likelihood of them remaining in violent relationships, which then expose them to sexual exploitation, for example. Now, studies have shown that many of these women, some cases up to 50%, are at higher risk of poverty in comparison to their counterparts. Secondly, many of the equality policies, practices, and services that are being offered to these women fall short because they are generic. They're applied in a one-size-fits-all manner and do not cater to the specific needs of these women. In order for us to resolve these issues, it is imperative that resources and funds are being invested into schemes and programs that will aid in the training of these women in areas that will satisfy the demand in the job market. Such internships and subsidies will increase opportunities for economic independence within these groups, giving these women a chance to gain control of their lives and no longer be financially dependent on their abusers, for example. Secondly, outside of providing training for specific roles, efforts should be made to enhance the financial literacy among these women, creating workshops and safe spaces where they can gain basic knowledge of basic economic and financial concepts, and also being able to go out and use that knowledge and those financial skills to enhance themselves. Now, this is not to say that such programs do not exist. Yes, there are many voluntary organizations across the UK which are established to provide circumstance-specific services to the varying group of minority women, usually equipped with specialist personnel and operational structures that cater to the needs of these women. But unfortunately, there's a growing concern that the specialist services are being replaced by generic service providers who do not have the expertise and therefore are not as effective in addressing the root problem that minority women are facing. And one of the reasons why the specialist services are being cast aside is because there is not enough funding. For this reason, it is important that specialist service providers are supported not only through funds and resources, but through policies coming from the government level. Policies that are, in order to be effective, need to be derived from an in-depth understanding of the inequalities that exist not only between men and women, but also considers the characteristics that are specific to minority women, because these disadvantages and limitations differ among these women. For example, cultural differences, social differences, and even religious differences. Understanding these equalities will not only create more supportive policies and maximize the benefits of the invested resources, but will also potentially eliminate traces of discrimination that are intertwined in the fabric of some of the existing policies and regulations. For example, there's an unspoken acceptance that there must be a certain level of vulnerability that a woman must be exposed to before she gains the support and assistance she needs. And if she doesn't fall within this makeshift box of what vulnerability should look like, she will not be given the recourse that she needs. Naturally, there are women out there who are being singled out by systems and practices that were implemented to give them equality, and instead they're further being discriminated against. Now, in closing, one might still insist on arguing that there are still existing policies, there are legislations that promote and address equality, but this does not change the fact that the true expression of equality, especially among minority women, is yet to be achieved. And for these reasons, I support the motion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Luela Figueira. And now I'd like to call on Simone Michaud to present her submission on the motion.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Madam Chair, as we convene today to address the pressing issue of gender equality, it is imperative that we delve into the complexities of the legal framework surrounding these issues. The intersection of family law and gender equality presents a unique challenge, one that demands our attention and our concerted effort for reform. In my address today, I will draw upon recent research, legal precedents, and shed light on the systemic disparities ingrained in our justice system and advocate for meaningful change. In a recent finding highlighted in the Law Society Gazette, a staggering 90% of women are left impoverished by the family law process, with their children often taken away by a system that fails to comprehend the collateral damage it inflicts on single mothers and their family. The alarming statistics underscores the urgent need for reform within the family law system to ensure equitability outcome for all women and children. In addressing these challenges, it is essential to consider the recent case that illuminates the intersection of family law and gender equality. In this notable case in 2023, the court grappled with the issue of custody and financial support in the context of a single mother. Here, the court decided to remove the child from the mother's care solely because she contested an expert witness. In advocating for change, we need a legal framework such as CEDAW to be enacted. CEDAW represents a lifeline for women and girls around the world, offering a comprehensive framework for addressing gender inequalities in all of its forms. The 30 recommendations outlined in CEDAW Bill of Rights provide a roadmap for government to promote gender equality and ensure the full realization of women's rights. However, achieving true gender equality requires more than just policy changes. It requires and demands a shift in society attitude and perceptions, as evidenced by the recent surveys shown, as one conducted by the Policy Institute, February of this year, 2024. Young men ages 16 to 29 are increasingly recognizing that women face more hardship than men. This growing awareness is a positive step forward, signaling a potential shift in society norms and attitude towards gender equality. Furthermore, it is essential to address the glaring gap in government representation considering women rights locally and internationally. The United Nations Convention
on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, that's CEDAW, was established in 1979, evaluating the convention status and declaration of the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. However, despite the significance of this treaty, the United Kingdom has yet to nominate a representative to sit on the CEDAW committee. This omission not only exposes the failure of recognizing the committee, but also demonstrates the lack of respect for women. Must we wait for another 40 years to pass this legislation before our courts? The time for action is now. I urge our government representative to prioritize the nomination of a qualified individual to sit on the CEDAW committee, ensuring that our voices and rights of women and girls are heard. And with that, I support the motion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Simone Michaud. And now I'd like to call on Mollie-Anne Heywood in her submission on the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I'm about to talk about isn't anything groundbreaking. It's something that, in my view, is actually a problem that we're still having to talk about it, but it's something that's still really prevalent. As we said in the introductions, I've been a social worker for several years, working with children and families across different local authorities, different areas of social work, and this is something that is coming up time and time and again with conversations I'm having with colleagues, with lawyers, legal professionals, and with families. I want to talk today about the role of women and mothers when the local authority and social workers get involved with children and families because of risk of harm. As we know, in many cultures and societies, mothers, women are revered as primary caregivers, the nurturing figures who tirelessly dedicate themselves to the upbringing and safety of their children. However, with this role, there does come this immense burden that often transcends the realms of fairness and reason. And it's an unfortunate reality that when social services become involved with these families, mothers are frequently held as the sole person responsible for any perceived shortcomings or failures within the household. They are expected to be the guardians of their child's safety, regardless of their own circumstances or the complexities of the situations they face. Mothers are held to be responsible for the protection of children, as well as for their partners' or ex-partners' behaviour, even when they themselves are victims. And I'm sure we can all think of the tragic, avoidable deaths of children that have been in the news recently and throughout the last 20 years since Victoria Climbié. And it's always seen on social media that the mother is then blamed. Why did the mother not do more? Why did she sleep with that man? Why did she do whatever? Why did she cause this? Not why did the man do X, Y, and Z as well? And not only is this a negative for women, but it also is a negative for men and children at the centre of it as well. The NSPCC recently completed a review of serious case reviews, serious case reviews are looking into the deaths of children when local authorities were involved, and they found that there was an emphasis on this emphasis on mothers and women resulted in men being hidden who pose a risk to children and mothers because they're being ignored, which results in further harm or death, or men who could have protected and nurtured the child in their life but were overlooked by professionals. Investigations into child neglect tend to focus solely on the mother's behaviour and responsibilities, even though fathers are very much present in these situations of neglect. And when physical abuse is the problem, workers focus on mothers and ignore fathers, even when they were the source of the difficulties. What mothers did do or did not do is often seen as more serious or more blameworthy than what the man did. And although the father may be perceived as a threat, the onus is still on the mother to remove him from the scene or else place him at risk of losing her children. Why is it that the mother, who failed to protect, is critiqued and criticised far more harshly than the perpetrators of domestic abuse or violence or neglect? This unjust burden only exacerbates the suffering of the mothers and endangers the life of their children. By placing the onus on mothers and on women, we overlook the role that the abusive partners play in perpetuating a cycle of violence within the home. and we fail to hold the perpetrators accountable for their actions and deprive mothers of the support they desperately need. Furthermore, when blame is placed unfairly on mothers, it also disproportionately affects those who are part of the global majority, living in poverty or systematically marginalised, as some of the earlier speakers today have highlighted very powerfully in their own speeches. And if we think about austerity and the current economic climate, one of the most devastating consequences of austerity is the erosion of the community level support, which once served as a lifeline for these women and families facing adversity. As a result of these vanishing services, women find themselves navigating a hostile landscape where the safety nets they once relied on have been torn apart. With fewer options, many are forced to endure unimaginable hardships on their own without the aid of these community organisations or the assistance of social workers. Women are then left with fewer alternatives but to face the intrusive scrutiny of social care involvement, where they may be criticised for not leaving soon enough, not having good enough or safe enough or stable enough housing, where they've had to promote contact arrangements, and where they have their own battles to face, or with the looming threat of social workers involved. There needs to be an overhaul of the thinking, training and models used in social work practice, both on a small, low-level scale, but also in terms of the legislation, legal practices and the broader system surrounding it. As such, and as this is highlighted by the motion today, I'm fully in support of this motion. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much, Mollie-Anne Heywood. And so that concludes the submissions being made on the motion, and therefore it remains only for me to move the motion and for you to stand and to second the motion, if you will.
I now move this motion, the Women's Parliament here in Buckingham on the 6th of March 2024, CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Women's Rights, Government Responsibility, Parliamentary Action, a Women's Bill of Rights. I move this motion.
I second the motion.
Thank you. The motion is passed unanimously.
Voices today have been strong, and this is why there is strength in women's voices. Afternoon, evening, at night, in the morning, and in the light of dawn, dawn light, women's voices. There's strength in the voices of women. And so, to afternoon. In the afternoon, sunshine blazing, yet there on the beach lying exposed, a body flashing beneath the sunlight, bright, blazing. Shocked, she said, having loved the beach all her life, for swimming, for sunbathing, for pleasure, for picnicking, this spoiled by exposure, blatant in sunlight. Yet the women's voices are still strong. And so in the evening to evening, in the evening, evening falling softly, around the streets and hills and offices empty, going home. Pressed against commuters, she stands straight, still, hedged in against the bodies, others' bodies, jammed up, clammed up fast, pressed, standing next to her, right there, right then, fast pressed. A gloating look, triumphant pressure. She, to remain silent, quiet, a pretense of unknowing that pressure, gloating look, triumphant prodding. Or she, to scream or shout or sound aloud her protest, jammed up, pressed, and yet the women's voices are still strong on that journey home in the evening falling softly. And so, in the night, as night is falling, home. Home where the heart is, home where is the sanctuary. A man's home is his castle, says Cook. In 1604, in Seaman's case,
Seaman and Gresham, reported in 1604 Yelverton at page 29. Seaman and Gresham in 1604 reported in 5 Cook's reports at page 91. The house is to him his castle and keep, his fortress and his summit, his home and his stronghold. So saith Cook. That 16th and 17th century judge and jurist, 1552 to 1634. 2 years dead before Chief Justice Hale's notorious work, Pleas of the Crown, is published in 1636. He, Hale, declaring rape in marriage no crime. He, Hale, denouncing women and girls as liars all. For as he, Hale, says, rape is a charge easily made, hard to be defended against, nary ever so innocent, he, the accused. And so, to home, his castle, keep, fortress, summit, home and stronghold. And yet, for her, she as ruled no person. She denied personhood, identity, autonomy, lost, gone, stolen, strayed, taken from her by those revered jurists of old, and not so old. 1929, the Persons Case at last. The Privy Council declares women persons. Edwards and the Attorney General of Canada reference in relation to the meaning of the word person in section 24 of the British North America Act. This is reported at 1928 Supreme Court reports at page 276. That case, holding women no persons, renounced by the Edwards and the Attorney General of Canada, reported in 1929 United Kingdom Privy Council at page 86, reported at 1930 Appeals Cases, page 143. And so, those past, now multiple jurists who had multiplied misogyny, those sex supremacists pronouncing women not persons, denying women personhood, denying women's personhood, via Sophia Jex-Blake and others, and the Senatus of the University of Edinburgh, reported in 1873, volume 11 Macpherson, page 784. In re-Edith Haynes, reported in 1904, volume 6 of the Western Australian Law Reports at page 209. Bed and the Law Society, reported in 1913, Broughton, page 305, 1914, volume 1 of Chancery at page 286, volume 29 of the Times Law Reports at page 634. Now these, all overturned, all gone, overturned, the Privy Council Supreme. And yet, no castle sanctuary for her, and there, within the castle, his castle, not hers, what crimes committed in the name of blissful domesticity. So she, seeking only her protection there, secures with deadlock, doors locked, and yet, what price a deadlock when the rapist has the key? And so, and yet, the women's voices are still strong. And so, in the morning, as morning lights the darkness, in the morning, sunlight gently dappling the sycamore leaves, as the shadow stands under the sycamore branches, hiding, yet seen, deliberate, saying by his stance, you're mine, you won't escape my eyes that follow you, stalking, taking from you every move you make. And yet, the women's voices are still strong. And so, the dawn, the new dawn breaking, Voices high, low, lilting, passionate, persuasive, poised. Voices here, strong, staunch, steadfast. In the name of women, all women, of all women, for all women, strong. The arms of the women before us, those arms of the past, the women pressing us on. Their hands supple with the strength they're passing on to us. As inheritors of their wisdom, their joy, beneficence, magnificence. Their shoulders, arms, their hands force us forward. In the fight, their voices strong. Still the echoes from the past, adding here to ours. Our voices strong ever. And so, we end this Women's Parliament now, today, but not forever, until the time, next time, we know the voices of women won't be silenced, will not be silenced. Listen. So, thank you. The Women's Parliament is now adjourned. Sine die. Thank you.